The smell of hospital disinfectant was pungent, mixed with the sour smell of vomit. Clara, 7 years old, howled, her eyes squeezed shut, her hands over her ears. The metallic sound of surgical instruments falling to the floor echoed like thunder inside her. One nurse tried to hold her down, another shouted orders. "Calm down, she's just agitated, hold that girl down." The needle, cold and long, glinted in the bright ceiling light. Her mother's voice, Helena, sounded distant, choked with panic. "No, please don't sedate her again." But it was too late. The liquid dripped into the child's vein, and in seconds the screams turned into muffled moans, until Clara's small, once vibrant body succumbed inert to the force of the medication. Her breathing, once rapid, was now almost imperceptible. This was not a scene of care, but of despair and control. What would drive a mother to allow such an intervention on her own daughter? Helena was at her limit. With teary eyes and a broken voice, she poured her heart out to Beatrice, her childhood friend, on a gray afternoon in her kitchen. "Bea, I can't take it anymore. I'm exhausted, worn out. Clara, she's slipping away from me. The crises are getting worse and worse, uncontrollable. I love her. I love her more than my own life. But I feel like I'm failing miserably." The autism diagnosis came as a sentence, not an answer. "It feels like we're living in an invisible prison. I've researched everything, Bea. Everything. Expensive. Therapies, absurd diets that promise miracles, doctors who look at me with pity, as if I were responsible for her suffering. And Paolo, oh Paolo, he's become a stranger. He's escaped into his work, into his travels, into anywhere that keeps him away from the reality of our daughter. He says that this isn't what he signed up for when he got married, that this isn't the future he dreamed of, as if Clara were a defect, a mistake to be corrected. I see the looks on the street, Bea, the whispers, when she has a meltdown in public. How rude. Her parents don't set boundaries. No one understands that her mind works differently, that the world hurts her. I feel judged, humiliated, alone in this battle. I've tried everything, Bea. I swear I have. I tried to follow the advice on the internet, the miracle methods of therapists. But she gets worse. She hurts herself. She bangs her head against the wall. It's as if every attempt I make to normalize her pushes her further away from me, from us. And school? They've already warned me that she doesn't fit in, that she's hurting the other children. As if a child could hurt another just for being different. My chest hurts in a way I can't explain. I just want to protect her from this cruel world, but it seems like I'm the first one to hurt her with my own desperate choices. I just want a minute of peace, a manual, a light. I'm drowning, Bea, and Clara is drowning with me. The first light came from a holistic therapist, Dr. Elisa, introduced by a well-meaning cousin. "Your daughter has energy blockages, Helena. It's not autism, it's a dysregulation of the throat chakra," Elisa declared, with a smile too serene for the gravity of the situation. Helena, hungry for any glimmer of hope, embraced the idea. Thousands of dollars were spent on crystals, essential oils, and alignment sessions that consisted of Clara lying on a stretcher while Elisa murmured mantras and ran her hands over the girl's body. The result? 0. Clara's seizures persisted, even more intense perhaps due to the confusion caused by the new smells and touches. Helena felt cheated, betrayed by her own naivety. The second salvation came in the form of a state-of-the-art neuroscience clinic, promising to reverse autism with an innovative treatment based on a strict diet and invasive brain stimulation. Paolo, who until then had been in denial, clung to this promise with all his might, seeing a chance to have his normal daughter back. "It's our only chance, Helena. If she doesn't get better, what will her life be like?" he pressed. Clara was put on an almost liquid diet, depriving her of the foods she loved. The stimulation sessions involved electrodes on her head, causing her panic and more seizures. The girl lost weight, her gaze became distant, and the few words she had previously babbled disappeared. The biggest betrayal came from the school. After countless tense meetings with the principal, Ms. Valeria, who repeated the mantra, "We don't have the structure for special cases," Helena was convinced to enroll Clara in a specialized school. It seemed like a solution. However, what they found was a cold place with few professionals and many children sedated to make them easier to handle. Clara spent her days in a room with repetitive toys, no real interaction, no stimulation. Helena learned this when she picked up her daughter early and found her alone in the corner, rocking back and forth and banging her head rhythmically against the wall, something she hadn't done in months. It was a silent cry of despair. Helena felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. False hopes not only emptied the family's bank account, but also emptied Clara's soul, turning her suffering into an even greater prison. The door to Helena and Paulo's house seemed to have an invisible warning sign. Conflict resides here. Every room was a stage for discord, and Clara, the silent protagonist of the drama, felt the weight most acutely. Principal Valeria, with her impeccably pinned hair and air of superiority, was the first to drop the bomb. Helena, Clara is not able to continue at our regular school. She doesn't interact, she doesn't follow instructions, and frankly, she's taking time away from the teacher that should be spent with other students. It's not a lack of willingness, it's a matter of ability, she said, in a tone that turned the school's inability into the child's inability. Helena felt her blood boil. My daughter is not a capacity problem, Mrs. Valeria. She just needs a different approach. But the principal just shook her head impatiently. The message was clear. Clara was a burden. At home, Paulo was the embodiment of denial. Helena, you're giving in too much. This girl needs a short leash. Autism is just an excuse for her bad behavior. That's what everyone says. He yelled, his eyes bloodshot, turning Helena's pain into fuel for his own anger. He refused to participate in therapy, to read about the subject, to even look Clara in the eye when she had a meltdown. He preferred long hours at the office, last-minute trips, the alcohol that made him forget, even if only for a few hours, the inconvenient reality he was living. The worst part? The arguments would explode in front of Clara. With her heightened sensitivity, she absorbed every word, every raised tone, and would shrink into herself, entering her own world, rocking back and forth repeatedly as a defense mechanism. The humiliation came from all sides. Paulo's sister, Sophia, an impeccable woman with no children, was always giving advice in front of everyone. Helena, you have to be stronger. If I were you, I'd put that girl in an institution. It's best for her and for you. The malice disguised as help was a stab in Helena's heart. Even the neighbors who had once been helpful now looked away. One afternoon in the park, when Clara had a sensory crisis because of a dog barking, a woman approached and whispered to her husband with a look of disdain. Apparently, this child has no manners. Helena held back her tears, consumed by shame. The world was a cruel mirror, reflecting the image of a failed mother and a problematic daughter. The decision to leave Clara with the gardener, Jose, a man who lived on the margins of family life, was not an innocent punishment. It was the last resort of a desperate mother, a blind attempt to isolate Clara from the pain of judgment, even if it meant handing her over to someone who, at first, seemed even more distant and incomprehensible. It was Helena's revenge against a world that suffocated her, a painful surrender in the hope of a miracle. The first week with Jose was a veiled hell. Clara cried, stamped her feet, refused to interact. Helena, when she handed over her daughter, felt a mixture of relief and excruciating guilt, as if she had abandoned a puppy. But Jose, the gardener whom the family hardly noticed, proved to be an abyss of patience. He didn't talk much, but he observed. With an almost ancestral stillness, Jose realized what no one else had noticed. Clara didn't hate being touched. She hated unexpected touch. The noise itself didn't bother her, but the disorderly cacophony did. Jose began to work with the earth, and Clara, initially reclusive, was drawn to the rhythmic movement of his hands. He didn't force her. He just left a small shovel and a pile of dirt next to her. On the first day, Clara just watched. On the second, she touched the dirt with her fingertips. On the third, she began to imitate Jose's movements, digging small holes, feeling the damp, cool texture. It was their first conversation, without words. The biggest turning point came during one of Clara's worst crises. The sound of the lawnmower, combined with the barking of the neighbor's dog, threw her into a state of visceral despair. She threw herself on the ground, screaming and banging her head. Helena ran, ready to intervene, to administer the sedative that had become the only solution. But Jose, with frightening calm, knelt down beside Clara. He didn't touch her. He just began to hum a low, repetitive melody, almost a tribal chant, while gently tapping his hands on the ground, creating a steady, predictable rhythm. Clara's screams subsided, turning into sobs. José's rhythm was an anchor in her sensory chaos. He then picked up a small, smooth stone, warmed by the sun, and placed it in Clara's palm. The girl squeezed the stone, feeling its temperature and shape. Gradually, the crisis subsided. Helena, who watched the scene petrified, felt a twinge in her chest. It was the first time she had seen her daughter calmed without medication, without force. José did not try to cure Clara. He understood her. He built a world for her inside the garden, a place where sounds were predictable, touches were gentle, and textures were safe. He treated her with the dignity of a queen, realizing that her crown was not made of gold, but of leaves, and her throne was the earth itself. Clara's punishment turned out to be her greatest liberation, and Helena's greatest revenge would not be against the world that judged her, but the proof that her daughter, with the right love, was not a problem, but an entire garden waiting for someone who knew how to cultivate it. The first small victory came with a glance. José was planting sunflower seeds, and Clara, sitting next to him, watched his every move. Suddenly, she raised her head and stared at him with her big, curious eyes, a direct, intense eye contact that lasted several seconds. José, with his usual quietness, just smiled gently. For Helena, watching from afar, that look was worth 1,000 words. It was confirmation that Clara was not lost, just hiding. Then came the sound. José whistled a simple melody as he watered the plants, a song he had made up for the flowers. One day, Clara, who had previously only made disconnected noises, began to murmur softly, imitating the rhythm of the melody. They weren't words, but it was an intentional sound, an attempt at communication, an echo of José's world that she was beginning to inhabit. Helena felt a chill run down her spine. Her daughter was trying to sing. The biggest leap, however, came with touch. Clara, who had previously shied away from any hug, one day, seeing José with his hands dirty from the soil, reached out and gently touched his face. It was a gesture of pure affection, of unshakable trust. José picked her up, something very few dared to do, and rocked her gently while she nestled her head on his shoulder. It was a hug, a real hug, without force, without fear. For Helena, it was like seeing a miracle. Clara's crises did not disappear completely, but the way she experienced them changed radically. When sensory overload came, she didn't scream uncontrollably. She sought out a quiet corner of the garden, the smell of wet earth, the steady rhythm of José's work. She learned to calm herself with the stones he gave her, feeling their texture and temperature. José taught Helena to look at Clara with different eyes. The girl's repetitive rocking was not a mania, but a way of self-regulating. Her attachment to certain textures was not stubbornness, but a need for security. José did not cure Clara. He decoded her, revealing to Helena a universe of possibilities that she, in her pain and despair, had never imagined. Clara's small victories were not just steps forward, they were giant leaps into the hearts of her family, unveiling the truth that the girl had always been there, just waiting to be understood. Clara's transformation in José's garden was the mirror that forced Helena to confront her own truths. She saw that in her frantic search for an imposed normality, she had failed to see her daughter's preciousness for who she was. Guilt turned into a painful realization. She had succumbed to social pressure, to the promise of miracle cures, to her own husband's denial, and in doing so, she had hurt Clara more than any stranger could have. Paulo, the absent father, could no longer ignore the changes. Clara's smiles were more frequent, the sounds she made were more melodious, and the garden, once a place to be avoided, now emanated a peace that attracted him. One day, he saw Clara reaching out to José, asking to be picked up. Paulo's heart sank. José, the gardener he almost despised, had won over his daughter in a way that he, the father, had never been able to. José, with his simplicity and quiet dignity, called Paulo over and handed him a small seedling. "She likes to watch them grow," he said simply, pointing to Clara, who was watching him. Paulo awkwardly planted the seedling next to his daughter, and for a moment he felt the earth in his hands, the smell of life, and the connection that time and autism had stolen from him. It was a moment of silent redemption for him. Helena understood that acceptance was not synonymous with giving up, but with liberation. Liberation from the relentless search for a non-existent cure, liberation from the judgment of others, liberation from the guilt that consumed her. Clara did not need to be fixed. She needed to be loved and understood in her uniqueness. Helena's revenge would no longer be against society, but proof that her daughter, just as she was a complete human being, capable of loving, learning, and being happy, just with a different roadmap for life. The pain of the journey was still there, but now it was accompanied by a deep gratitude. Jose, Clara's gardener, had taught the family the greatest lesson of all, that true love does not try to prune, but nourishes, respects, and allows one to flourish in one's own essence. Helena and Paulo's house did not turn into a fairy tale, but rather a home where acceptance took deep root. The pain of having an autistic daughter in a world still so unprepared did not disappear completely, but the family found new tools to deal with it. Paulo, who used to run away, now spent hours in the garden with Clara and Jose, learning the language of the earth, the language of his daughter. He discovered that Clara's communication did not require complex words, but presence, patience, and understanding. Helena stopped looking for miracle cures and began to focus on Clara's quality of life, on her happiness. She became a strong voice in the community, advocating for inclusion and demystifying autism with the serenity of someone who had learned from her own experience. Jose, the gardener, was no longer an employee, but a member of the family, a guardian of Clara's soul, a teacher who, with the simplicity of the earth, taught everyone that true love does not try to mold, but nurtures the essence. Clara, the girl who was given to the gardener as punishment, became the family's greatest teacher. She taught them to slow down, to observe the small details, to find beauty in the simplest things. The acceptance and respect sown by Jose blossomed in every corner of the house and in the hearts of each family member. The journey was long, the challenges persisted, but now they had a guide. The unconditional love that Jose showed Clara, proving that treating someone like a king or a queen is not about status, but about recognizing the intrinsic value of each being without demands or conditions. Not all love speaks loudly. Some manifest themselves in silent gestures, in the patience of a glance and the gentle touch of hands that nurture. But all true love listens to the soul, even when words fail. If Clara's story touched you, if you felt the pain of a mother and the redemption of a family, then this message is for you. Leave your comment, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and join us in building a world where every life, with its nuances and particularities, is seen and celebrated. Your voice matters. Together, we can transform judgmental glances into embraces of acceptance.